Hi, everybody. Again, thanks for joining us on today's webinar. We'll be exploring SIP versus analog guest room phones and doing a cost analysis with you on that. This is part of an ongoing series of webinars that we are presenting. We've done a number of them in the past concerning hotel voice technology. You can find those recorded on our website and download those and listen to them at your leisure as well. We also have upcoming every other Tuesday and Thursday another webinar with another topic. Next one that will be available will come out on September 26th, I believe. At any rate, you can check with our website and get all these presentations recorded. Now, for today's webinar, I want to introduce you to Frank Melville. He's uniquely qualified to give these kind of presentations. He's been CEO of PhoneSuite since 1988 and the essential part of the development and design of our systems. He's also grown up in the industry and literally inside a hotel with his family and an Aspen hotel property. So he knows as much as there is to know about this, and with that, I'll let him take it away. Frank?
Let's get going on what we're doing here today. The approach today is we're going to look at the components and the architecture of an analog guest room phone use versus a SIP guest room phone use. We're going to then do a cost analysis on a per phone basis, looking at what's involved for each phone. Then we're going to do a similar cost analysis on a per room basis. Okay, so everybody, sorry about that. This is what I was talking about, the webinar series we're doing today versus next week, and then afterward anything you have that you might like to see. Again, we're going to look at the architecture of each analog and SIP. We're going to look at an analysis of cost on each on a per phone basis. Then per room, we're doing per room because most rooms have 2 phones, sometimes 3. There are hotels which certainly have just 1 phone in the room, but most have a 2 or more. And so we're going to look at 2 phones in a room and how that changes the cost. And then the full system purchase analysis. And we'll look at what it would take to do an entire system. So let's look at the traditional analog architecture just with respect to the guest room phone. Of course, first you need a digital TDM or maybe a VoIP TDM hybrid PBX in the phone room. And that connects with a large set of cables to the house wiring, we call it, but it's the category 3 or better cabling with termination blocks here. And then that simply goes through Cat 3 or better wiring to the guest room where the guest room phones are plugged into the jack in the wall. Pretty simple. And most of us are very familiar with this. In the SIP world, if we're going to drive SIP guest room phones, at some point, obviously, we still need a PBX. Here we've got a server for a fully VoIP-only or SIP-only PBX, but it could be a VoIP TDM hybrid PBX as well. And that is connected to the voice LAN or the hotel LAN through switches. And you need PoE switches because the PoE switches need to connect, again, to the house wiring. Here the cabling has to be category 5 or better for data cabling needs so that it can handle the TCP/IP or the SIP traffic. And those then use category 5 or better wiring to go to each guest room phone. Now here, the important thing to notice is that these PoE switches are inserted in between the PBX and the phones, and these can be distributed closer to the phones, but they do need to be PoE, or you have to plug each one of these phones not only into the cabling jack in the wall, but also to a power outlet nearby each phone. And that gets cumbersome. It's ugly. It is not something you want to present in a guest room. So PoE switches are required for this if you want to do it right, and we're going to do our cost analysis that way. Okay, let's jump into a simple single phone analysis. This is going to be a very quick webinar because it's very simple and straightforward. But if you look here, on our single phone analysis, we are not bringing the PBX itself into this. One of the reasons is that so many PBXs today are VoIP and SIP and analog hybrid systems, and in that case, then the base PBX price is the same. So we're going to look at the software licenses, the switch ports that are needed, whether it's a switch port in the PBX or that PoE switch port, and then the cabling and the phone. And if you look here, that for whatever reason, we did not start this, but we are continuing with it. The analog software license is less expensive than a similar SIP license. And for those of you who know one of our largest competitors' pricing, this is taken right from their published manufacturer's list price. The switch port here of $41 for analog is a standard card divided by the number of ports on that card. For the SIP side, it's that PoE switch, which typically have 8 or 16 PoE ports on them divided by the number of ports, so the cost of that switch divided by the number of ports. Cabling, we're going to say, is the same in both cases, when in reality it's a little bit more expensive to cable for SIP than it is to analog if you're starting from scratch and you're doing it on purpose. However, these numbers are low at $50. This is about the lowest you'll see for a drop, but nobody today is cabling with the old analog Cat3 cable. It doesn't make any sense. The future is coming, and the recommendation to you is to make sure if you do recable or if you're building a new hotel, do cable with Cat5 or better, maybe even Cat6 or better, to make sure that you're future-proofing yourself. The last thing here is the phone, and that's where you're going to see the big price difference. $31 is a Telematrix 3300 with 5 buttons on it, analog phone. $89 is the exact same model, 3300S for SIP, or it's S3300, with 5 programmable buttons on it. So this phone in the analog model or the SIP model looks identical. And we just grabbed Telematrix because they're a very popular brand, and we grabbed their standard model that is available in both analog and SIP for the comparison. But you can do your same comparison with any other model of phone. And you get that here at the result here is at the retail price level, $197 per phone for just the software license, the additional ports needed to drive that extra phone if you could buy them one at a time. You can't. Cabling and the phone, versus $286 over here on the SIP side. So it's not quite $100. It is at $89 more to drive a single SIP phone, just with the components that make up the addition of that one phone to the whole PBX solution. So if you have any questions about that, please type that in your questions box, and Angela will bring that to me at the end. The next thing we're looking at here is a typical room with 2 phones in it. Now, it's a very interesting difference here in the SIP world versus the analog world. In the analog world, you can drive 2 phones from a single port and a single software license and a single cable up to the room just by making a branch of that termination in the room to another jack, and you can have to drive 2 phones on it. So the only thing that goes up in price on the analog side is the cost for the 2 phones. Instead of $31 for 1 phone, we've got $62 for 2 phones. Not so on the SIP side. On the SIP side, each SIP phone has to be a separate endpoint to the SIP PBX or the VoIP PBX. So you have to buy 2 software licenses to drive 2 phones in a single room here, double the price. You have to buy 2 switch ports because each phone has to be driven separately off of that power over Ethernet data switch. And you have to cable home run from that data switch to the phone. So unless you're putting the switch right in the room, which isn't done much, then you've got double the cabling costs. And then, of course, you've got double the phone costs. Here, the cost to do SIP, instead of being about 30–40% more, it is more than double to put 2 guest room phones in a room over 2 analog phones in the room. If you have any questions about this, again, please type them into your questions box, and we'll go on to that last piece of the analysis here, and that is a typical 100-room hotel. Now, in this analysis, it's overly simplified. We've done a couple of things here. We have not added in the admin phones because we assume the admin phones are going to be identical whether you're driving analog or SIP guest room phones. We've not added in other modules, like if they have a voicemail system, PMS interface, anything else that might cost extra money is assumed to be identical in both scenarios. We're only looking at what is different analog versus SIP. And using the manufacturer's list price of a very popular hybrid VoIP and analog solution available today. The base price of the PBX itself without any cards in it is $3,000. To buy software licenses to drive 100 single-line phones with that system, if you had to buy each license exclusive of packages, which actually make the analog even cheaper, but if exclusive of packages, $75 a license, that's $7,500. At $120 a license, that's $12,000. Actually, I think this should be $11,000. I think it's $110. And then the switch ports here. This is 5 analog cards to drive 100 endpoints, and this is 9 8-port. Is that correct? I'm sorry, 9. It is the correct number. Sorry, the correct number of Power over Ethernet switches to drive the SIP phones, and then the SIP phones themselves. We saw that they were $31 a piece for the phone. That's $3,100 versus $89, which is $8,900, and you see that the price difference is quite substantial here. Now, this is very simple. You'll be able to pull this down off of the Phone Suite channel on YouTube. So if you want to grab this and do your own analysis based on the phones you like to use or the switches you like to use, you certainly can. But this gives you a really good idea of the true cost difference of analog versus SIP. There are some other things you should be thinking about when considering what kind of phones to put in your room. And incidentally, just so that you know, in the category of tooting our own horn, we sell this solution either way. We don't care which way you buy it. You can buy all SIP endpoints from us, and you can buy all analog endpoints from us. We provide both options. So we are just passing on to you what we've learned from years of experience. Some other things you need to think about. New hotels, really, if you're cabling a new hotel, you're going to do direct Cat5 runs, or Cat6 probably today, to every jack in the room. It's what everybody is doing. It only makes sense because you need to be future-proof, and you can't open those walls very easily 5 years down the road if, for some reason, there is a very compelling need to put SIP or some kind of IP-based solution at each jack. If you only have Cat3, you either need to recable or you can buy some expensive SIP adapters at each end of the equation, one in the phone room and one at the jack by the phone, to turn your Cat3 cabling into something that can carry SIP phone signaling and data speeds. A company called FiberEdge makes something called the Unifier that does that. So that's something to think about if you're considering SIP guest room phones. SIP phones have to be provisioned, meaning programmed, before they can be used. What does that mean? Well, somebody who's not just your typical Joe off the street, an IT professional needs to program each phone before it can be used so that the phone knows where the server that's talking to it is located and how to talk to the outside world. And it has to also know what extension number it is. And that has to be done before you can put it in a room. You cannot simply grab a new phone off a shelf in the maid closet or grab the phone out of room 103 because it's out of service for maintenance and put it into room 105 and have it work. It won't work. In that first case, the phone won't work at all. In the second case, borrowing 103's phone and plugging it into room 105, if they're SIP phones, will cause that phone to believe it's still in room 103, not 105. And that leads to, oh, I'm sorry, I said this already. SIP phones can't be borrowed. So what's the big SIP deal? Why are we even talking about this? I'll tell you, SIP and VoIP are coming, and we have seen some of the larger chains, Marriott especially, were really pushing SIP in the guest room around the time of the recession. The recession had nothing to do with this, but as the couple of years of having phones out in the field wore on, they recognized that unless you need a really fancy guest room phone that can do things that only a SIP phone can do, putting a SIP phone in the guest room was really a burden. It was expensive. It was hard to maintain. And so even Marriott fell off of that mandate a couple years back, and they're back to saying, go ahead, put analog phones in the guest room. And I believe Hilton feels the same way, that for at least the foreseeable future in the guest room, an analog phone makes sense. And we don't know what that guest room phone is going to look like in the future. It may be the guest's mobile phone running some app that is their guest room phone while they're there. We don't know. Costs will come down, so that phone cost is going to get to the point where at least they're a lot closer to equal than double the price as we see today for the actual guest room phones. And we think that in competition will probably drive the software licenses prices so that they're about equal too. There is a large discrepancy between the prices in no matter who you go to for endpoint licenses, and I think those will start to become more equal. For several years, all of the chains have been saying, if you're going to renovate or if you're going to build a new hotel, please cable with Cat 5 or better, and now it's, again, Cat 6 or better, but that is creating the backbone, the infrastructure, so that SIP can come when it is ready for everybody. And that brings on this conclusion here, and that is, it will happen. It's just not financially justifiable, except for in rare cases today. And that is our conclusion. You may have your own. And if you disagree, please type that in the question box now while we're waiting for Angela to bring me any questions. I'd just like to remind everybody that, again, this webinar is being recorded. All of our webinars are recorded. They are placed on the Phone Suite channel on YouTube. I don't believe, Jerry, that they're actually embedded into our website. There's just a link to them there, but they are on the Phone Suite channel on our website.
Yeah, you are correct. They are just a link there.
Okay, and
I'm not showing any questions.
Okay, I have one here, and that is, when do you think that the SIP phone and analog guest room phone prices will even out? Boy, that's anybody's guess. The deal with the analog guest room phones right now is that they're made in China en masse and have become, or excuse me, have been very popular. For decades, they've been making these analog guest room phones in huge quantities, and so the prices are driven down. SIP, being newer, also made in China, isn't at the kind of quantities that are required in order to drive those prices down. So it's sort of a chicken and an egg thing. When the quantities get up there, then the price will come down. Well, the price needs to come down before people start to embrace it more. And I think that's the only question I got.
So if other questions do come up after we're complete here, you can send them to sales@phonesuite.com, and we'll be happy to answer them that way. Or, of course, feel free to call us.